The first person who noticed my bruises wasn't a doctor, a friend, or the man who claimed to love me. It was the man everyone else was afraid to look in the eye. The fluorescent lights in the employee restroom buzzed softly above me as I stared at my reflection for what felt like the 100th time that week. The concealer covered most of it, not all of it. A faint shadow still lingered near my wrist, just beneath the cuff of my black long-sleeve uniform. I pulled the sleeve lower and forced myself to breathe. One shift, just one more shift. Then I could go home, lock my apartment door, and pretend everything was fine for a few more days. The restaurant was already filling up when I stepped onto the floor. Friday nights were always the worst. Expensive suits, expensive watches, expensive smiles. Everyone pretending life was perfect while waitresses like me moved silently around them carrying trays and trying not to become part of the scenery. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 25 years old, working double shifts while finishing my certification courses online and surviving on coffee, determination, and promises I kept making to myself. Someday things would get better. Someday I would leave. Someday I would stop being afraid every time my phone lit up. Table 12 just arrived, my manager whispered as he rushed past me. The tone in his voice immediately caught my attention. Nervous, respectful, careful. I glanced toward the private section near the back of the dining room. 4 men had entered together. Dark suits, calm expressions, the kind of confidence that couldn't be purchased. It had to be earned, or feared. The man seated at the center looked younger than I expected. Mid-30s maybe. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a charcoal suit tailored perfectly to his frame. He wasn't smiling, wasn't talking much either. Yet somehow every person at the table seemed to orbit around him, like planets around a silent sun. That's Dominic Hayes, another server whispered beside me. Just don't mess up his order. I nodded and grabbed a pitcher of water. I wasn't interested in wealthy men or local rumors. I had enough problems of my own. Still, when I approached the table, I felt it immediately. The shift in the air, the awareness. Dominic Hayes looked up as I filled his glass. His eyes were calm, observant, the kind of eyes that noticed details most people missed. I quickly looked away and continued working. For the next hour, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The feeling that someone was watching, someone paying attention. Then it happened. A dinner rush, a crowded aisle, a distracted customer stepping backward at exactly the wrong moment. My tray tilted. Crystal glasses slid toward disaster. My heart stopped. I reached for the tray too late. Then a hand caught my wrist. Strong, steady, controlled. The tray stabilized instantly. No shattered glass. No scene. No disaster. Careful, a deep voice said quietly. My sleeve had slipped upward. Only an inch. Maybe 2. But it was enough. Enough for the fading marks beneath the fabric to see the light. Enough for Dominic Hayes's eyes to lower to my wrist. Enough for something in his expression to change. Not anger. Not pity. Something colder. Something that made the entire room suddenly feel very still. And for the first time that night, I had the terrifying feeling that my secret was no longer mine alone. For a second, neither of us moved. The noise of the restaurant continued around us. Silverware clinked against plates. Conversations drifted through the warm air. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed. But all I could focus on was the way Dominic Hayes was looking at my wrist. I pulled my sleeve down so quickly that I nearly dropped the tray again. Heat rushed into my face. Embarrassment, panic, shame. It all blended together until I could barely think straight. Thank you, I whispered. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. He released my wrist immediately. No lingering touch. No unnecessary gesture. Just control. You are welcome, he said. His eyes remained on me for another second before returning to his dinner. The moment should have ended there. I wanted it to end there. Instead, I spent the next 2 hours feeling his attention every time I walked through the dining room. Not constantly, not aggressively, but enough that I noticed. Enough that I became aware of every movement I made, every adjustment of my sleeves, every forced smile, every time my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. The messages kept coming. I did not need to read them to know who they were from. The screen lit up 3 times while I was refilling coffee, twice while I delivered dessert, once while I stood beside the service station pretending I had not noticed. Finally, during a brief break near the kitchen entrance, I looked. 5 missed calls, 7 text messages, all from Ryan Cole. My stomach tightened. The latest message was only 4 words long. Call me right now. I locked the screen immediately. My hands were shaking again. Everything okay? Another waitress asked. Just tired, I lied. She nodded and hurried away. Everyone believed that answer because exhaustion was normal. Fear was not. By 10 o'clock the crowd had grown thicker. Every table was occupied. The restaurant glowed beneath amber lights and expensive chandeliers. Outside, rain tapped softly against the tall front windows. Inside, the world felt polished and perfect. Then the front door opened. I saw him before anyone else did. Ryan. My chest tightened so fast I almost forgot how to breathe. He wore the same confident smile he always wore in public. The smile that convinced strangers he was charming, reliable, safe. He moved through the restaurant like he belonged there, like he had every right to find me. Claire, he called warmly. Several guests glanced over. I forced a smile onto my face. What are you doing here? I asked quietly when he reached me. You have not answered your phone. His tone remained pleasant, controlled. I was worried. I am working. Then I will wait. He reached out and adjusted a loose strand of my hair. The gesture looked harmless. Anyone watching would have thought it was affectionate. My entire body stiffened anyway. Ryan noticed. His smile never changed. We should talk after your shift, he said softly. I think that would be best. Before I could answer, a strange silence settled over part of the dining room. Not complete silence, just enough to feel different. Ryan followed my gaze toward the private section. Dominic Hayes was no longer eating. He was watching us. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no curiosity, nothing at all. Yet something about the stillness in his face made Ryan lower his hand immediately. Neither man spoke. They simply looked at each other across the restaurant. And for reasons I could not explain, the temperature in the room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Ryan was the first to look away. It happened so quickly that most people would have missed it, but I did not. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he forced that polished smile back into place. I should let you get back to work, he said. His voice remained friendly, almost cheerful. Call me when you are done. I nodded because it was easier than arguing. Easier than creating a scene in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Ryan leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Do not stay out too late. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. I watched the door close behind him before realizing I had been holding my breath. The moment he disappeared, the pressure in my chest eased slightly. Not completely, just enough that I could breathe again. When I glanced toward the private section, Dominic Hayes had returned his attention to the table. One of the men beside him was speaking. Another was checking something on a tablet. Everything looked normal. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something important had just happened. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of coffee refills, dessert orders, and exhausted smiles. By 11:30, the dining room had begun to empty. Chairs scraped softly across hardwood floors as guests left. The kitchen noise faded. The warm energy of the evening slowly drained away. I was wiping down a service station when my manager approached. Good work tonight, he said. You can head home after cashing out. Home. The word did not bring comfort anymore. It felt like another responsibility. Another place where I had to be careful. Another place where I measured every sound and every mood. I finished my closing duties and changed out of my uniform. My wrist ached slightly as I pulled on my coat. The bruises were fading now, yellow around the edges. Less noticeable than before. Still there. Still reminding me. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Ryan. I ignored it. The rain had grown heavier by the time I stepped outside. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement in long golden streaks. Cars rolled past slowly, their tires hissing against the road. I pulled my coat tighter and started toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. Halfway down the sidewalk, a black SUV eased to the curb beside me. My pulse immediately jumped. The passenger window lowered. One of the men from Dominic's table sat behind the wheel. Miss Bennett, he said politely. Mr. Hayes asked me to make sure you got home safely. I stopped walking. That is not necessary, he insisted. Rain tapped steadily against the vehicle. I stared at the driver, searching for some sign of pressure or expectation. There was none. He simply waited. Calm. Professional. Why? I asked. The driver offered a small smile. You would have to ask him. I looked up the street toward the bus stop. Another 10-minute wait in the rain. Another ride home alone with my phone lighting up every few minutes. The offer should have frightened me. Strangely, it did not. What frightened me was how badly I wanted to accept it. And somewhere across the city, I had the distinct feeling that Dominic Hayes already knew exactly why. The sensible part of me said no. Every warning my parents had ever taught me echoed through my head. Do not get into cars with strangers. Do not trust powerful men who appear out of nowhere. Do not mistake kindness for safety. Yet as rain soaked the shoulders of my coat and another message from Ryan lit up my phone, I found myself opening the passenger door. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Clean, quiet, warm. The driver did not ask questions. He simply pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic. Manhattan blurred past the windows in streaks of gold and white. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at the glowing city outside. Eventually, curiosity won. Does Mr. Hayes do this often? I asked. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Do what? Send a car for employees he barely knows. A small smile appeared on his face. No. That single word somehow made me more nervous than any long explanation could have. The rest of the ride passed in silence. 20 minutes later, the SUV turned onto my street. My apartment building stood exactly where it always had. Old brick, flickering security light, rusted mailbox panel near the entrance. Nothing special, nothing impressive. Yet when the vehicle stopped at the curb, relief washed through me. I had made it home. Thank you, I said as I reached for the handle. Miss Bennett. I paused. The driver handed me a simple white envelope. Mr. Hayes asked me to give you this. My stomach tightened. What is it? I do not know. He was lying. Not maliciously, just professionally. I accepted the envelope and stepped into the rain. The SUV disappeared down the street before I even reached the entrance. Inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it. Silence greeted me. The kind of silence that should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt lonely. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it for nearly a full minute before opening it. There was no letter inside. No instructions. No business card. Only a small folded piece of paper. Confused, I opened it. For words had been written in neat black ink. You deserve better, Claire. That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just 4 words. I read them again. Then again. Something tightened painfully in my chest. Not because the message was romantic. It was not. Not because it was dramatic. It was not that either. It was because no one had said those words to me in a very long time. My phone buzzed again. Ryan. I stared at his name across the screen. For once, I did not answer. I turned the phone over and walked to the window. Rain continued falling across the city below. Somewhere out there was a man who had looked at a few fading bruises and somehow seen more than everyone else had managed to notice in months. And for reasons I could not explain, that realization frightened me far more than the storm outside. The next morning felt strangely different. Nothing around me had changed. My apartment was still too small. The radiator still rattled every few minutes. My coffee still tasted slightly burnt because I had bought the cheapest brand at the grocery store. Yet something inside me felt unsettled. I kept thinking about those 4 words. You deserve better, Claire. I should have thrown the note away. Instead, I folded it carefully and slipped it into my wallet before leaving for work. The entire subway ride downtown, I kept telling myself it meant nothing. A wealthy man had noticed someone having a difficult week. That was all. By noon, I was back at the restaurant. The lunch crowd moved slower than dinner service, giving me too much time to think. Around 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Ryan again. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Seconds later, another call came. Then another. By the 5th call, I finally answered. What? I asked quietly. There was a long pause on the other end. You ignored me all night. His voice sounded controlled, but something underneath it felt strained. I was tired. You got home late. My stomach tightened. How would you know that? Another pause. I drove by. I closed my eyes. A familiar feeling settled over me. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that came from constantly explaining yourself. Constantly defending normal decisions. Ryan, I am at work. Then we will talk tonight. I do not know if that is a good idea. Silence. Heavy silence. What changed? He asked. Nothing changed. But even as I said it, I was not entirely sure. Because something had changed. For the first time in months, I had started questioning things I had accepted for too long. Claire. His voice softened. I care about you. I looked around the restaurant. Sunlight streamed through the front windows. Customers laughed over lunch meetings. Life moved normally around me. Yet those words no longer landed the way they once had. I have to go, I said. Then I ended the call. My hands trembled afterward. Not because I was afraid of Ryan. Not exactly. I was afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of making decisions that could not be undone. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly until my manager approached my station carrying a sealed envelope. This was dropped off for you. My heart skipped. Who left it? No idea. He shrugged and walked away. I stared at the envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a single card. Thick white paper. Elegant black lettering. On the front was only a phone number. On the back, written by hand, were 8 simple words. If you ever need help, call. No questions. No signature was necessary. I already knew who had sent it. My pulse quickened as I slipped the card into my apron pocket. Across the room, the front door opened. A cold gust of air swept inside. And standing in the entrance, scanning the restaurant with a troubled expression I had never seen before, was Ryan. The moment I saw Ryan standing in the doorway, I knew something was different. Not about him. About me. A week earlier, I would have immediately worried about whether he was upset, whether I needed to explain myself, whether I had somehow done something wrong. This time my first thought was simpler. What is he doing here? He spotted me almost instantly. Relief flashed across his face before he began weaving through the lunch crowd. I slipped the card deeper into my apron pocket. Claire. He stopped beside me and attempted a smile. It did not quite reach his eyes. Can we talk? I am working. It will only take a minute. Something about his voice felt strained. Uneasy. Like a man trying to solve a problem he could not understand. I glanced toward my manager, who was busy helping another table. Fine, I said quietly. 1 minute. Ryan led me toward a quieter corner near the hallway that connected to the restrooms. He ran a hand through his hair. Something strange has been happening. I blinked. What do you mean? People have been asking questions about me. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Work. Finances. My apartment. Things that are none of anyone's business. He laughed nervously. It is probably nothing. But it clearly was not nothing. I could see it in his face. Ryan was a man who liked certainty, control, predictability. Whatever was happening had disrupted all three. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He stared at me for a moment. Because ever since that night at the restaurant, everything feels different. My pulse quickened. That has nothing to do with me. Are you sure? The question hung between us. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. Ryan's eyes dropped toward the sound. Instinctively, I stepped back. A small movement, barely noticeable. Yet something shifted in his expression when he saw it. You have been avoiding me, he said quietly. I have been busy. No, he shook his head. You have been pulling away. The frightening part was that he was right. Not because of Dominic Hayes. Not because of mysterious notes or black SUVs. I was pulling away because for the first time someone had looked at my life from the outside and made me question what I had accepted for so long. Ryan exhaled slowly. Claire, I care about you. I looked at him carefully. Maybe he believed that. Maybe part of him truly did. But caring about someone and respecting them were not always the same thing. I need space, I said softly. His eyes widened slightly. Space. The words sounded foreign coming from his mouth. Just for a little while. Silence stretched between us. Finally he nodded. If that is what you want. But his expression suggested he did not understand. Maybe I did not fully understand either. Ryan left a few minutes later. I watched him disappear through the front doors and expected relief. Instead I felt uncertainty, fear, hope, all tangled together. Then my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. My heart skipped as I opened the message. There was only one sentence. Trust your instincts, Claire. Sometimes the hardest person to save is yourself. I stared at the screen while the restaurant buzzed around me. And for the first time in years, I wondered what my life might look like if I stopped waiting for someone else to rescue me. For the next 3 days, nothing dramatic happened. No confrontations. No unexpected visits. No mysterious black SUVs waiting outside my apartment. Life continued exactly the way it always had. Yet somehow everything felt different. Maybe because I had started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how often I apologized for things that were not my fault. I noticed how frequently I changed my plans to keep other people comfortable. I noticed how many decisions in my life were based on avoiding conflict instead of pursuing happiness. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it. On Thursday evening, I finished my shift just before sunset. The sky beyond the restaurant windows glowed orange and gold, painting the city in warm light. I was collecting my things from the employee locker room when my manager appeared in the doorway. Claire. Yeah. Private event tonight. Table reservation under haze. My heartbeat stumbled. Okay. They specifically requested you. I stared at him. Requested me? He shrugged. Big spenders make unusual requests. Then he disappeared down the hallway before I could ask anything else. For the next hour, I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. Maybe Dominic preferred familiar service. Maybe he did not even know my name. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Then 7 o'clock arrived. The private dining room overlooked the river through floor-to-ceiling windows. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Candles flickered on polished tables. The entire room felt expensive without trying to impress anyone. Dominic Hayes sat alone near the window. No entourage. No business associates. No bodyguards visible nearby. Just him. He looked up when I entered. Good evening, Claire. Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely unsettling. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. His expression softened slightly. Dominic. I nodded, unsure what to say. For several minutes I focused on work. Water. Menu. Specials. Professional distance. Safe distance. Yet every time I approached the table, I became aware of how carefully he listened when I spoke. Most wealthy customers treated service staff like background noise. Dominic paid attention. The difference mattered more than I wanted to admit. After I delivered his meal, he surprised me by asking, "How are your classes going?" I blinked. My classes? Business administration. Online program. 2 semesters remaining. I stared at him. How do you know that? He took a sip of water before answering. You mentioned it while talking to another server last week. I searched his face for any sign of manipulation. Found none. He had simply remembered. Such a small thing. Yet nobody else had remembered. Not even Ryan. They are going well, I said quietly. Good. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Not forced. Comfortable. A rare thing in my life. As the evening continued, I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. Smiling without effort. Breathing without tension in my chest. Existing without constantly monitoring someone else's mood. When the dinner finally ended, Dominic stood and buttoned his jacket. Claire. Yes. He studied me for a moment. You seem lighter tonight. The comment caught me off guard because it was true. I did feel lighter. Not healed. Not transformed. Just lighter. As though some invisible weight had shifted. Maybe I am, I admitted. A faint smile appeared on his face. Good. Then he walked away, leaving me standing beside the table with a strange warmth in my chest and the unsettling realization that the most powerful man I had ever met seemed less interested in controlling my life than in reminding me it belonged to me. The following Monday began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The uncertain kind. The kind that makes you keep checking your phone even when you know nobody is called. 3 days had passed since I last heard from Ryan. No messages. No missed calls. No unexpected appearances outside work. Nothing. A month ago that silence would have made me anxious. Now it made me thoughtful. I stood behind the restaurant's espresso station watching steam rise from a fresh cup of coffee and realized something surprising. I had spent so much energy preparing for other people's reactions that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy a quiet morning. You seem happier lately. The voice belonged to Megan, another waitress who had worked beside me for nearly 2 years. Do I? She laughed. You smile now. I wanted to argue. Then I realized she was right. Not constantly. Not dramatically. But enough for someone else to notice. That realization stayed with me throughout the afternoon. By 6 o'clock, the dinner crowd had arrived. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and warm light. I was delivering a bottle of sparkling water to a corner table when my manager hurried toward me. Claire, what happened? Someone is asking for you. My stomach immediately tightened. Old habits. Old fears. But when I looked toward the entrance, the person waiting there was not Ryan. It was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s. Elegant gray coat. Kind eyes. She smiled when she saw me. Claire Bennett. Yes. I hope I am not interrupting your shift. Not at all. She hesitated before extending a small envelope. Dominic asked me to deliver this personally. My pulse quickened. Who are you? Her smile widened slightly. A family friend. Before I could ask another question, she gently squeezed my hand and walked away. The envelope felt surprisingly heavy. I waited until my break to open it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. Not a note this time. A scholarship application. My eyes widened as I scanned the details. Tuition assistance, professional mentorship, career placement opportunities. The type of program people competed fiercely to enter. Attached to the front was a handwritten message. You earned this yourself. I only thought you should know it exists. Dominic. I stared at those words for a long time. No expensive gifts. No obligations. No pressure. Just an opportunity. The distinction mattered. More than he probably realized. That evening ended later than usual. When I finally stepped outside, the city air felt cool and fresh. Across the street, a familiar black SUV waited beneath a street lamp. Dominic stood beside it, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the skyline. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. How was your day? Such a simple question. Yet nobody had asked me that without expecting something in return for a very long time. Good, I answered honestly. Better than most. He nodded as though that mattered to him, as though my answer carried weight. We stood there quietly while traffic moved through the city around us. Finally, I looked at him. Why are you helping me? The question had been waiting for weeks. Dominic considered it carefully. Because someone should have reminded you a long time ago that your future is worth protecting. The words settled deep inside me. And standing beneath the glow of that street lamp, I realized the most important thing he had given me was not protection. It was perspective. He had looked at a woman who had forgotten her own value and simply refused to agree with her. 6 months later, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window on the 20th floor of a downtown office building, holding a certificate with my name printed across the bottom. Claire Bennett, Business Administration Program graduate. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Not because of the paper itself, because of everything it represented. There had been a time when I could barely imagine next week. Now I was planning the next 5 years. The scholarship program had opened doors I never knew existed. The restaurant job had become part-time. My grades had improved. My confidence had grown. Little by little, the life I wanted had stopped feeling impossible. People often talk about change as though it happens overnight. It does not. Real change happens quietly. One decision, one boundary, one brave conversation at a time. Ryan never returned to the restaurant after that season of my life. I later learned he had moved away to take a job in another state. No dramatic confrontation. No revenge. No grand ending. Just distance. The kind that allows people to choose different paths. And for the first time, I understood that peace is sometimes the happiest ending of all. The bruises faded long ago. The fear took longer. But that faded too. Not completely. Scars rarely disappear entirely. Yet they no longer controlled my decisions. They no longer decided who I was. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ready? The voice made me smile before I even turned around. Dominic Hayes stood in the doorway, looking exactly as composed as the day I first met him. Dark suit, calm eyes, quiet confidence. Some things never changed. Almost, I said. He stepped inside and glanced at the certificate in my hands. Pride flickered briefly across his face. You earned it. The words reminded me of the note he had once sent. You deserve better, Claire. Back then I had not believed it. Now I finally did. We left the building together and stepped into the warm spring evening. The city glowed around us. Car headlights reflected against glass towers. People hurried along crowded sidewalks. Life moved forward in every direction. Dominic opened the passenger door of his car. I laughed softly. You know I can open my own door. I know, he said. That is why I like you. I shook my head and climbed inside. Some people would probably never understand our story. They would see a powerful man and assume he rescued me. The truth was more complicated than that. Dominic did not save my life. He reminded me that it was worth saving. He did not give me a future. He helped me believe I deserved one. As the city lights passed outside the window, I reached into my wallet and found the old folded note I had carried for months. The paper was worn now, the ink slightly faded. For simple words, you deserve better, Claire. I smiled and looked over at the man driving beside me. You were right, I said quietly. Dominic glanced at me. About what? I folded the note and slipped it back into my wallet. Everything. His smile was small but genuine. The kind of smile he rarely showed the rest of the world. And as the city stretched endlessly ahead of us, I realized something important. Sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who fight your battles. Sometimes they are the ones who help you remember your own strength. And that night, for For the first time in a very long time, the future felt brighter than the past.